How about a monthly wrap up for the month of July 2024? It was an interesting month because I read my favorite book of the year so far, as well as my least favorite. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Theo. Thanks for hanging out with me today. This is RekindledReader, my booktube channel where I talk about book stuff. So if you like this kind of stuff, please go ahead and subscribe and hit the bell notification so you can get notified when I post videos and updates and tell you a little bit about the books that I've been reading. So let's go ahead and get into it because I want to start off this wrap up with my favorite book that I've read all year, and that is The Will of the Many by James Islington. This was a treat, like from start to finish. I couldn't put this book down. I had an absolute blast with it, and I devoured it a lot quicker than I would with my usual books. This is basically, it follows the character of Vis, who is an orphan that gets adopted within the nobility and sent off to a training school. There's a lot of twists and turns. It's pretty fast paced. There's some secrets, some mystery, some intrigue, a couple reveals. And so I don't want to say too much more than that in order to not spoil anything for you. But basically it follows the character of Vis, who is like I said, an orphan, and it's told through his perspective in first person. And it's done very, very well that way. It's set in a world where things are basically based on a hierarchy. There's a caste system, and the power in this world comes from the collective will of the many, of the populace in this world. And within the layers of the hierarchy, there are some people that have a lot of will ceded to them from those beneath them and those that are at the very bottom. So with that all out of the way, how was this book? This book was super fun, like I said, and the writing is actually exceptional. I found it really good. It's nothing that it's not purpley, flowery prose. It's very to the point, but it's done quite beautifully. And his writing from the Lycanius trilogy, which I really enjoyed, has leveled up significantly. I also seem to really like lately first person narratives. It reminds me, my favorite that I've read in a while has been the Sun Eater series by Christopher Rocchio. So it gives me a little bit of Sun Eater vibes in that way. Also reminiscent of Harry Potter in the training school and, you know, the magic school for all intents and purposes. It's not really a magic school. It's more like a academic training ground for the nobility, but there is magic in the world and it speaks a little bit to it. It's kind of a mysterious system and a bit of a soft magic system in terms of what it's capable of. I don't know if it's soft or hard because it can definitely do some stuff. It's just a little bit hard to explain, I guess, in a wrap up how the magic works. But it's reminiscent also, people say, of Red Rising. It's dark academia mixed with like Hunger Games. A lot of people have said it gives me Nevernight vibes, just in terms of, again, there's a gladiator scene, a Colosseum scene, I should say, training school. You know, you have these classmates and they're learning stuff, and it's just, I don't know. I do like that stuff, and I'm obviously a sucker for the orphan farm boy goes on a quest type of trope. And so that is what you get in here. It was exceptional. I really liked it. Like I said, a lot of political intrigue. There's some reveals in here that are really fun. There are some scenes in here that are quite powerful. A lot of stuff happens. It's very fast paced. Like I said at the beginning, I couldn't put it down. And it's not the epilogue, because James Islington is known as the king of epilogues to me, because in the Lycanius trilogy, each book just left you, the books 1 and 2 left you with epilogues that just blow your mind and make you need to continue with the series so badly. And so in this one, the ending kind of throws everything for a loop and blows your mind. Like, I still am thinking about it. I was joking with people. I said, hey, I just finished The Will of the Many and I'm sitting here staring at a wall contemplating what happened, and they're like, yeah, I read it like a month ago and I'm still sort of thinking about it. It's kind of crazy. So I cannot tell it. This will be one of my most anticipated releases for the next year. I'm very, very excited. I don't know when this is coming out. If you guys know, leave me a comment. Is it coming out in 2025? Probably. I cannot wait for book 2. I am like, literally, I'm dying to know what happens. I loved it. It was an easy 5-star read for me. I enjoyed it from beginning to end, and I would highly recommend it. You've probably seen it make the rounds on BookTube. Go ahead and give this book a shot. The next book that I gave 5 stars to as well was from an author that I really like now. So if you watch my top 10 video, you'll see that I think number 9 on it was The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. What a beautiful book that was. I recently read Circe by her because I had it on the shelf for a very long time, and for some reason I think I needed a break in between Greek mythological like retellings, and that book was so impactful and so beautiful and moving, and I enjoyed it so much that I knew I had this one on deck, to read, and I wanted to just give myself some time as to not compare the two in a good way or a bad way, but mostly a bad way. I didn't want one to seep into the other. I wanted to take a break and a breath and just read this one when I had some time. So I finally got back to this one, and I was really impressed, and I had a really good time with it. This book is a little bit difficult to explain in terms of what it's about, but basically it's about Circe, who is the daughter of the sun god Helios, the Greek sun god. He's actually a Titan before the Olympians, so he's a Titan, and she's the daughter also of like a sea nymph, which is like a lesser goddess. And so Helios and this sea nymph had a couple kids. One was Circe, and she is sort of the one that gets bullied, the one that gets looked over, the one that gets stepped on and treated like absolute dirt. And she is starting to come into her own throughout the book, and it's a journey of self-discovery and coming to terms with her own immortality as a goddess and her relationships with everybody around her. It's actually very interesting and very well done. What's cool about this is she is a prominent character in Homer's Odyssey. And in this book, it's very cool, and I won't spoil anything, but you get to know a little bit of background of some characters like Odysseus, like Jason from Jason and the Argonauts. I think I said Odysseus, a little bit of history of the Iliad, and like the Trojan War and the Trojan Horse, and Prometheus and Icarus and Daedalus and their myth, the Cyclops, a bunch of like monsters and stuff that you've sort of heard of in passing, or some of you may know more intimately than even I do. It goes into a little bit of their backstory, and it touches a little bit on a lot of different myths, but it weaves together the whole narrative in a really complete, satisfying way. I don't really know how else to describe it. It also goes on to talk about how the gods were narcissistic and vindictive and power hungry and mischievous at times, and not all of them were good. In fact, they had good and bad in all of them, and treated mortals like shit a lot of the time. And then throughout the story, there's a couple, I don't want to say a couple romances, but it's hard to explain otherwise. There's romance in this book, but it's really her relationship to those around her and her ability to get close to people and start to trust other people because of the way she's been treated, trust mortals, trust gods, and all of those people in between, right? That the demigods, monsters, creatures. It's her relationship with the world around her. She eventually she gets banished by her father to this secluded remote island, and she basically becomes like a sorceress or a witch of the island. And yeah, she has a son, and he is part of the grander myths as well. And I won't say too much more about how things go down, but there's prophecy involved. At the end of the day, it's a pretty heartbreaking story with some uplifting, optimistic moments in it, and it's punctuated with really nice, beautiful quotes. It's just really well done. I loved it, and I would recommend it. I think if you read Madeline Miller and you liked The Song of Achilles, you might really like this one. I think if you read The Song of Achilles first, you might like this one more than if you read them the other way around. I don't know. That's a speculation. I feel like because this is a broader scope story and it touches on more myths and more figures, some people might like that more. I also can appreciate if people liked a more concise or intimate micro sort of story and not necessarily want to bounce around and not spend as much time on everybody as happens in this book. So I don't really know. I can see it either way, but what I can say is if you really liked Song of Achilles, you will really, really like Circe. I don't know which one you'll like more, but I feel like it's a pretty safe bet that if you read that one and enjoyed it, you should also pick up this book. It was really, really good, and I had a really good time with it. This was another 5-star book, obviously. Okay, another book that I gave 5 stars on Goodreads, it was actually 4.5, but I rounded it up because Goodreads is stupid, is Ordinary Grace by William Kent Kruger. And this is... A lot of you probably know that Boy's Life is like my favorite book. My favorite book aside from Storm of Swords, which is a series, it's fantasy, and I kind of just leave that by itself. But Boy's Life by Robert McCammon is like my favorite standalone novel, and this is very reminiscent of that. It's a coming of age story. It follows a kid during a summer in the 60s in a small town in Minnesota. His dad is a preacher. His mom is a musician or something. And they move to this small town so the father can basically run a few churches. And it kicks off with a death. And then there are a couple more deaths that punctuate this kid's summer and in his memory. And they are very, very important to him, to the town. And it's a coming of age story first and foremost, but it also explores a lot of themes about trauma, grief, death, relationships, that kind of stuff. There's one death in particular that becomes the most traumatic for this boy and his family. And it really became sort of an anchor piece to the whole narrative from that point on. Like I said, it's a coming of age story. It's very reminiscent of also The Body by Stephen King. I think if you like Robert McCammon and if you like Stephen King, if you like coming of age stories, if you like intimate town settings, small town America, you like a little bit of suspense, you like a little bit of mystery, some, family drama, some secrets with, people in the town, and learning the backstory of some of these characters and how they play a role in each other's lives. You'll be surprised sometimes. There are some reveals that are done pretty well. And it was just a very descriptive book with a lot of atmosphere, a lot of good imagery. I really felt like I was there. It was just a really nice book. I really enjoyed it. I think what held it back from being a 5-star for me is I'm not one to deliberately think ahead too much or try to solve mysteries as they present themselves in books and stuff like that. I try not to look too far ahead. I try to ride the wave, go with the flow, and kind of enjoy things. But even about halfway to then 3/4 of the book, there was a twist or a reveal that I sort of thought was coming, and then it goes a different way, and I sort of predicted each way. So I kind of predicted the first twist, and then when it was determined that may have been a misdirection, and again, I'm not spoiling anything because there's a lot of weird little things like that, but there's a main one, and I felt like it might be a misdirection, and I thought, I wonder if I'm right on this. And it turns out that I was more right than I wanted to be. I won't spoil whether I was or not, or I predicted the ending or not. But I feel like if I was expecting to be a little bit more shocked, a little bit more surprised, and have a little bit more fulfillment in the ending than I got. It was still beautiful. In fact, the ending is quite beautiful. It's probably one of the better parts of the book. But I just felt like I could have gotten a little bit more, or had a little bit more impact when those reveals presented themselves. So for that reason, it held it back a little bit. It's also a little bit short, so he could only do what he could do in 300 pages or so. So it was a 4.5, still loved it. One of the better books I've read all year. Hasn't been a great year for reading, but this is definitely up there on the list. So again, if you like Robert McCammon, if you like Stephen King, if you like all the things I mentioned, go ahead and give this a shot. All right, before we get to the worst book I've read all year, unfortunately, and it kind of breaks my heart, let me talk about a little, I don't even know what to call this. It was like 3 or 4 pages. It's not a novella. It's a short story. There you go. It's a short story. I read a short story by Andy Weir, the guy that wrote The Martian, as well as Project Hail Mary, and whatever else he wrote. I can't remember off the top of my head. I really like him, and this was called The Egg, and I got it on Audible, I think. For somehow I ended up getting it for free, and I read it, and it was interesting. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. It's not going to blow your mind. It's like I said, it's like a 10-minute audiobook because it's like literally 3 or 4 pages. But in that time, it begs the question, of it's very existential, and it's a little bit matrixy. It's a little bit like, are we in someone else's version of reality? Are you even yourself? Are you everyone at the same time? I won't say any more than that because it's very easy to spoil a 3 or 4 page short story. So if you want something kind of quick and dirty, by an author that I really like, who is Andy Weir, and something that it's thought-provoking, evocative, it'll make you think for the rest of the day, go ahead and pick up The Egg. It won't blow your socks off, but it was interesting. All right, now for the book that was the worst book I read all month, and probably my biggest disappointment so far of the entire year. I read my very first Haruki Murakami book, and I probably didn't start in the best place, but the premise of this book had so much promise, and it got me so intrigued, and honestly, I was hooked throughout the whole time reading this book, and it was still only a 2 stars for me, which I can't remember the last time I gave a book 2 stars. I'm pretty generous, and I usually know what I like, but I took a shot with this, and this one was Haruki Murakami's Colorless Tsukuru Tozaki and His Years of Pilgrimage. And within the story, that title will make a lot of sense. The Years of Pilgrimage will make sense, and also the fact that he is referred to as colorless will also make a lot of sense. It's basically about this Japanese boy becoming a man, and when he's in high school, he builds a very, very strong, very family-like bond with these 4 other kids. There's 2 boys, not including Tsukuru, and 2 girls. So there's 3 boys, 2 girls, and they are an absolute family unit. They are inseparable. They become such good friends. They keep romance out of it and relationships out of it, and it's strictly platonic. And they all serve, they all kind of fit a different role. One is sort of the smart, straight arrow kind of person. One is the funny person. One is the musically gifted person. One is the big, jock. One is the charming kind of suave, whatever. So they fit into these just organically, these like stereotypes. And then all of a sudden, this is the premise that really hooked me. All of a sudden, so he goes to college, and then out of nowhere, he comes back and he finds that they have all distanced themselves from him. They have completely dissociated with him. And when he tries to find out why, he calls them and all this stuff, he is told nothing. He basically loses this family, this friendship group that he had, and he's not told anything. And then it all kind of starts to unravel. He meets this woman later in life, and you get snippets of him growing up, going to school or finishing school, getting jobs, having girlfriends, having roommates, living his life. And he finally meets this girl who he starts dating, and she is absolutely interested in the story of what happened and how these people who seem to have left such a mark on Tsukuru and given him such trauma in a way that he's been carrying with him his whole life. She's interested in hearing what happened to these people and the reason why they kicked Tsukuru out of the group and just stopped talking to him. The reason that you find out way later, and I won't spoil it, is actually a pretty crazy reason. And it kept me reading the whole way through. The fact that he gives her their contact info and she starts to track them down for him, and then he opens the door by traveling a little bit and starts to put the pieces together in terms of what happened and rebuilding some of the holes in his life and relationships by getting these answers and getting some closure. That was really nice, and it kept me reading the whole way. I devoured this book in 2 days, but it's punctuated with a lot of weird stuff, a lot of meandering, a lot of weird writing, and I know it's translated, but still it was terrible. It was punctuated by a lot of weird, there's no way for me to explain this other than just saying a lot of weird sex stuff. It just was punctuated by a lot of weird sex stuff. And it sounds like, from what I've heard from other people, this is not isolated to this one book by Murakami. Apparently, Murakami does this a lot, where he has these weird dream sequences where he's in a dream. And then he also has these sequences where there's just weird sex stuff going. I don't know how else to describe it. Part of it is very integral to the plot. And 90% of the weird sex stuff is just masturbatory and kind of gross and vulgar and for no real purpose to the plot. It could have completely done without it. And honestly, the ending was really disappointing. I thought this was going to be some huge reveal, some huge cathartic experience for him, and it was completely underwhelming. It's one of those books where you close the book and then you look at the wall and you're like, what did I just read and why? Like, what? I cannot tell you what the point of this book was. So, am I going to try another Murakami? Probably. Am I stuttering a lot today? Yes. Am I going to read another Murakami right away? Probably not. There's a couple on my list that I want to try. One is 1Q84, I believe is the title. A lot of people say good things about that one. We will see. As for right now, me and Murakami, we have a complicated relationship. Not sure where to go from here. If you have recommendations and you are a diehard Murakami fan, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, that is it. I've rambled way too much. That is my wrap up for the month of July 2024. Thanks for hanging out with me. Comment, like, subscribe, do all that stuff. Help the channel grow. I appreciate every single one of you. And until next time, I'll catch you guys on the next video.